Welcome to the mysterious casebook. In the fog-bound alleys of London, a figure appears twice yet leaves no trace. Tonight we join Sherlock Holmes in a case where memory, illusion, and murder converge. Have you ever spotted something others missed? Tell us below. Now light a candle and let the mystery begin. It was nearing the close of an unusually silent evening at Baker Street when the sharp, deliberate knock upon our door disturbed the measured rhythm of Holmes's bow upon the violin. The note faltered, trembled in the air, and died upon the string. "A precision of 3 taps," he murmured, setting the instrument aside. A caller, neither timid nor rash. Before I could rise, Mrs. Hudson's soft footfall in the passage was followed by the low murmur of voices, and then the door opened to admit a man whose aspect carried the ghost of the street into our lamplit calm. He stood for a moment, hat in hand, the rain still glistening on his shoulders. His gaze darted first to Holmes, then to me, with a kind of hunted calculation. "You are Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said. And though his voice was steady, there was a quaver beneath it, like the faint ringing of a distant bell. "I am," Holmes replied, "and you, sir, are one who fears to be believed." That strange remark seemed to loosen the man's composure. He half laughed, half sighed, and advanced into the room. I noted a streak of grey at his temple, the uneven clasp of his gloves, and the pallor of exhaustion that no mere drizzle could explain. "My name is Merryweather," he said. "Charles Merryweather, clerk to the Royal Geographical Society. I have come, Mr. Holmes, because I believe I have seen twice in one night the same man who should, by every account, be dead." The violin string quivered faintly as though answering him. Holmes's eyes brightened with that cold fire I had learned to recognize as the herald of intellectual pursuit. "You interest me profoundly," he said. "Pray be seated. Begin with the first sighting." "It was at 7 o'clock, Merryweather began, "in St. James's Square. I had left the Society's offices late and was about to cross toward Pall Mall when I noticed a figure emerging from the railings by the club. Even in the half-light I recognized him, Henry Carstairs, a colleague, whose funeral I had attended scarcely a fortnight ago. The words hung like a draught in the room. I confess I uttered an involuntary exclamation. "Are you certain of your recognition?" Holmes asked quietly. "As certain as I am of my own hand," the man replied. His gait, his height, the very tilt of his hat was Carstairs. He looked directly at me, seemed to hesitate, and then turned into Duke Street. I gave chase, but when I reached the corner he had vanished. And the second occasion? Holmes leaned forward, fingertips pressed together. "An hour later, near the river." I had returned to my lodgings in Pimlico, unsettled and determined to dismiss what I had seen as an illusion. Yet looking from my window, I saw him again beneath the gas lamp opposite my door, the same coat, the same hat. He stared up at my window as though he knew I watched. Then he raised his hand like this. Merryweather imitated a slow gesture of beckoning and walked away into the fog. A low whistle escaped Holmes, a gesture of summons, not menace, he murmured. "And you followed him?" I did not dare. I thought I might be mad. The faint ticking of the clock filled the silence that followed, underscored by a distant carriage bell. The aural motif, the echo of faint ringing, seemed to weave through the air again. Holmes rose, paced once across the rug, and stopped abruptly at the window. "Watson," he said, "the rain conceals more footsteps than it erases. Kindly bring your coat. Mr. Merryweather, you will accompany us. If a dead man walks in Pimlico tonight, we had best learn upon what business." We were in the hansom within minutes, the clip of the horse's hooves marking our heartbeat through the wet streets. Merryweather sat opposite, his eyes shifting to every passing shadow. Holmes, motionless beside me, lifted his head once toward the chime of a distant church clock. "Twice seen, once dead," he muttered. "The arithmetic of ghosts, Watson, seldom yields a zero." When we arrived at the narrow street, the gas lamps burned fitfully against the fog. Merryweather pointed toward the opposite pavement. There, under that lamp, he stood just there. Holmes alighted without a word, knelt briefly, and examined the puddled stones. A small indentation caught the light. "Heel print, square-toed," he said softly. "Recently." And here he touched a faint smear of something pale against the curb lime dust. "Freshly settled." "From a mason's yard?" I ventured. "Or from the earth of a disturbed grave," Holmes replied, rising. The bell note in the distance trembled again through the mist. "Watson, we shall have work before the hour strikes thrice." Before I could reply, a shadow detached itself from the end of the street, a man, tall, moving with mechanical precision. Merryweather's breath caught audibly. "There! Do you see him? That's Shim!" Holmes's hand lifted in warning, quietly now. The figure halted beneath the next lamp. The pale light struck its face, and for an instant I saw what Merryweather meant. The features were colourless, almost waxen, yet unmistakably human. The man turned his head, met our gaze directly, and raised his hand in that same slow, deliberate beckon. The sound of the bell shivered once more through the fog. Holmes stepped forward first, his figure emerging from the fog like a darker shade of shadow. The stranger did not move, though the hand he had raised now lingered in mid-air, uncertain, as if caught between invitation and warning. The faint toll of the church bell still hung in the mist, neither ending nor beginning. Holmes's voice, low and precise, cut through it like a thread through cloth. "Good evening. If you are indeed Henry Carstairs, it would spare us much curiosity if you said so plainly." No answer. The man's head inclined slightly as though considering the sound of his own name. His lips parted, but no word came. Then abruptly he turned and began to walk. The motion was neither hurried nor sluggish, but mechanical, as though dictated by something external to human impulse. Holmes moved after him without hesitation, and I followed, with Merryweather stumbling between us like a man chasing his own nightmare. We crossed under 3 flickering lamps before the stranger stopped again, now by the iron gates of a small builder's yard. The air carried the dry, acrid scent of lime. He placed one hand upon the gate and turned toward us. For the briefest instant I thought I saw recognition, or was it grief, in those unnaturally steady eyes. Then a carriage rattled by, its wheels clanging against the stones, and in that moment of sound the figure was gone. Holmes was through the gate almost before the echo had faded. Inside, heaps of timber and broken stone loomed like the bones of unfinished dwellings. The mist settled thickly between them. I heard Holmes call softly, "Carstairs," but the name dissolved in the damp air. Only the faint ringing of a loosened chain against metal answered. Merryweather's voice trembled behind me. "He cannot vanish into nothing. I saw him when he was there." Holmes crouched beside a pile of debris. "Not nothing," he murmured. "Observe, Watson. Lime again, disturbed, and here a footprint leading inward but none returning. Yet there are no walls to conceal him." His eyes lifted, their glint sharp as flint. "Unless concealment lies beneath, not around." He brushed aside fragments of wood to reveal a wooden hatch half hidden beneath the dust. Its hinges were new, still oiled, without rust. He struck it lightly with his cane, and the hollow thud beneath told the rest. "A storage pit," I said. "Perhaps a builder's cellar?" "Perhaps," Holmes replied. "Yet the lime tells another story. Open it." Together we lifted the hatch. The stench that rose was faint but unmistakable, the sour tang of decay, smothered by chemical dust. Holmes struck a match, its hiss bright against the silence, and the glow revealed a narrow shaft descending by crude steps into darkness. A white residue dusted the top rung. "Stay here," he said to Merryweather. "Watson, with me." The descent was brief, but suffocating. At the bottom lay a small space walled by rough stone. The flame quivered in the draught, revealing a shovel, a sack of lime, and upon the floor a shape wrapped in coarse sacking. Holmes knelt, drew back the cloth, and the bell motif seemed to sound again inside my own skull. The face beneath was unmistakable. It was Henry Carstairs, lifeless, grey, and still. I turned sharply toward Holmes, but he was already examining the corpse with that merciless calm that served him for reverence. "No more than 24 hours dead," he said. "Yet Merryweather claims to have seen him walking this very night." Then what in heaven's name did we follow? Something Holmes bent closer, someone who knew precisely how Carstairs looked, moved and dressed. "Observe the wound behind the ear, Watson, clean, deliberate, and administered before the lime. No struggle, no fall. A man struck from trust, not fear." A faint sound above made us freeze, the clink of metal against metal, light but deliberate. Holmes extinguished the match and motioned upward. We climbed swiftly, emerging, to find the gate swinging in the night air, and Merryweather alone, pale as chalk. "He was here," Merryweather gasped. I heard footsteps, and someone passed behind the yard and called my name. When I turned, there was only fog. Holmes's eyes swept the street. "The echo of a bell, Watson?" I listened. Far off, the church clock tolled again, softer now, as though muffled by distance. "A 11:15, I said. "Precisely the hour Carstairs left his club on the night he died," Holmes murmured. A pattern repeating itself motion replayed across time. "The ghost is punctual." He turned to Merryweather. "You said you attended the funeral. Where was Carstairs buried?" "At Kensal Green," came the faltering answer. "Section 12, near the chapel. Then tomorrow we visit his grave. But first," Holmes added, eyes narrowing, "we must discover who knew of his burial and who might wish him to walk again." As we made our way back toward the main street, Holmes's stride was swift, his mind visibly engaged upon invisible calculations. "Watson," he said suddenly, considered the lime. "It serves to hasten decay, to obliterate the interval between life and recognition." Our friend wished the real Carstairs to vanish before the false one appeared. "You believe there are two?" "I believe there is one too many," he said grimly, "and one of them is still at large." The cab they had come in was gone, replaced by an empty hansom waiting without a driver. Holmes's gaze lingered upon it. The horse shifted restlessly, bells on its harness tinkling in the gloom, the sound motif perfectly in tune with our dread. He approached, examined the seat, and lifted a folded paper from the cushion. It was damp and smudged, but legible. To Mr. Merryweather he read aloud, "If you value your sanity, return to the river at midnight. You will see the truth." Merryweather's lips trembled. "It's his writing, Carstairs' own hand. I would swear to it." Holmes folded the note and placed it in his pocket. "Then we shall keep the appointment." He looked toward the distant river, where the fog thickened into a seamless grey. "Watson," he said quietly, "when a man dies twice, the second time is usually for someone else's sake. Let us be there to witness who." The faint bell echoed again, soft, continuous, and unresolved, leading us onward through the mist. The sound lingered as we followed it, the bell's dim vibration guiding us through the veiled streets toward the river. The air grew colder, heavy with moisture and the faint metallic scent of tide water. Merryweather walked between us, his eyes darting to every wavering shadow as though expecting each to take form. Holmes remained utterly still within himself, save for that slight forward inclination of the head, which meant his mind was sprinting ahead of us all. When we reached the embankment, the lamps along the parapet burned weakly, their reflections trembling upon the dark water. A barge moved slowly under the bridge, its low horn like some wounded beast. The chime of the bell merged with it, indistinct, almost imagined. Holmes halted at the corner where two lamps stood, opposed across the pavement. "Watson," he said softly, "remembered this sound. It has followed us from Baker Street, yet it has no visible source. A tone that recurs without origin may be as human as any footprint." Merryweather shuddered. "He told me to come here. At midnight." "But what are we to see?" "Midnight is 5 minutes away," Holmes replied, glancing at his watch. "If the dead can keep appointments, then our visitor is punctual indeed. Observe quietly. Let the fog do our concealment." We waited. A police whistle blew distantly. A carriage clattered far off and died into silence. Then from the slope that led to the river steps, a figure emerged. He moved slowly, coat collar turned high, hat drawn low, carrying a small lantern that glowed faintly through the haze. The rhythm of his walk was familiar to the measured, mechanical stride Merryweather had sworn to. He descended to the lower path and paused beside a mooring post. Merryweather gripped my sleeve. "That's him. By all that's holy, that's Carstairs." Holmes did not move. "And yet we buried him. Let us see what rises when the grave is restless." The figure placed the lantern upon the ground and bent as though waiting for something in the water. The faint scrape of metal against stone reached our ears. Then another sound, the low splash of a small boat drawing in from the current. A man within it rose and stepped ashore. Holmes's hand pressed my arm. "2 ghosts are one too many," he murmured. "We shall meet them." We advanced from the fog in silence until the stranger by the post turned sharply, startled. The lantern cast his face in profile, and once again I felt that eerie sense of duplication, the same angular jaw, the same expressionless gaze as the corpse beneath the yard. Yet now, under the unsteady flame, there was movement, breath, and awareness. "Good evening, Mr. Carstairs," Holmes said evenly. "Or shall I say, Mr. Whoever you are?" The man's eyes flickered with alarm, then settled into composure. "You should not be here," he said. His voice was low, clipped, almost deliberate in its control. "This is no affair of yours." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, stepping closer. "A corpse in a pit and a note written by its hand make it very much my affair. Perhaps you can explain how you correspond with the dead." The man smiled faintly. "There are things better left buried, Mr. Holmes. Yet they seem persistently unburied," Holmes said, "especially when they bear lime upon their boots." The man's gaze sharpened, then drifted to Merryweather. "You were not meant to bring company," he said coldly. "You were told to come alone." "You wanted proof," Merryweather stammered. "If you are who you seem, then I am a murderer returned." The voice carried sudden bitterness, or perhaps merely a man punished for surviving. Holmes raised a hand. "Let us have clarity before drama. You speak as one wronged. The grave we opened tonight held your likeness. Explain that, and you may yet convince me you live by right." The man hesitated, eyes moving from Holmes to the dark water. "If I tell you, you must swear it goes no further." Holmes's expression hardened. "Truth does not bargain." The stranger sighed and gestured toward the barge drifting nearby. "Then see for yourself. My brother lies there." Merryweather made a strangled sound. "Brother?" "Twin," the man said. "Henry Carstairs and I were born together, though only one of us was meant to remain in England. The other himself was sent abroad after an incident best forgotten. I returned in secret last month, only to find Henry ruined, indebted, desperate. He begged my help to vanish, to let the world believe him dead while he escaped his creditors. I agreed to the exchange. He took my passport and fled. I remained to see the burial performed. Holmes studied him. An elaborate deceit. Yet your brother's corpse lies in a pit, not at Kensal Green. The man's composure cracked. Impossible! I saw his coffin lowered, signed the register. And who conducted the burial? Holmes asked sharply. His employer from the society, Sir Latham, and a curate. I thought nothing was amiss. Holmes's tone shifted, softer now, probing. So when you returned to your old lodgings tonight, you expected peace, not pursuit. I received this note, the man said, handing Holmes a second folded paper from his coat. It bore my own signature. Holmes opened it under the lantern. The river knows who lives in your name. Midnight will tell the rest. He folded it again and slipped it away. A handwriting match, Watson. Same pen, same flourishes. Whoever writes as both brothers writes also as death. From the river came a sudden creak of rope, a sound like the tolling bell itself, stretched into the current. Holmes looked toward the dark surface. Our watcher departs, he said quietly. There is a third man. He listens, he writes, and he digs graves with precision. Merryweather's teeth chattered audibly. Then who lies in that pit if not Carstairs? Holmes turned, eyes alive with calculation. Someone meant to close this story before it began. A corpse sufficient to convince the living twin and us that Henry was gone. The question now, Watson, is whose body we have mistaken for his. A splash interrupted him and the lantern guttered as a stone struck it from afar. The light died, plunging us into fog and echoing water. Holmes seized my arm. Back to the steps. They mean to drown proof before dawn. We retreated swiftly, the sound of retreating oars mingling with the bell's distant chime. When we reached the parapet, Holmes stopped and looked once more into the mist. The river keeps its own register, Watson, he said. Tonight it has added one name too many. Tomorrow we shall read which. The faint clang of a buoy drifted through the darkness, steady, mournful, unresolved. Holmes's words hung between us as the buoy's clang rolled out into the fog. Merryweather leaned heavily against the parapet, breathing hard, his face drained of colour. You mean, he stammered, that Henry may still live, that someone else lies in his place? Or that both have died by the same hand, Holmes replied, his tone level as a metronome. The bell tells us not of spirits, but of careful orchestration. Someone wished the world to believe that death could walk. He turned abruptly to the man who called himself Carstairs. You said your brother was in debt. To whom? Several tradesmen, a pawnbroker in Holborn, but most pressingly Sir Latham himself. He had lent Henry a substantial sum to finance some expeditions to the Sudan. The society frowned upon it. The funds were personal. And the terms of repayment? Carstairs hesitated. Severe. Henry pledged a portion of property that was not wholly his to pledge a cottage near Richmond belonging partly to me. Holmes gave a short nod. Then Sir Latham had motive both to retrieve his money and to silence exposure. The false burial could serve both ends. What simpler alibi for murder than a death already proclaimed? The river hissed faintly against the stone, punctuating each word with its liquid rhythm. The bell's echo drifted again, softer now, like the dying breath of reason. Holmes drew his coat tighter and gestured for the cab that lingered down the street. "To Baker Street," he ordered curtly. "We shall not sleep tonight, Watson. The dead have moved more than once. We must move faster." The drive back was wordless, save for the occasional clatter of the wheels and the rhythmic jingle of the harness bells, which seemed to mock our thoughts. Inside the familiar glow of the sitting room, Holmes went directly to his writing table. He unfolded both notes, the one Merryweather had received and the one found in the hansom, and spread them beneath the lamp. "Observe, Watson, the downward stroke of the H, the peculiar loop in the Y, and this faint indentation here beneath the signature. Whoever wrote these pressed harder than necessary, leaving trace impressions on the next sheet of paper. He sprinkled a light dusting of graphite and blew softly. The outline of a third message began to emerge. It read, 'Grave finished. Payment on delivery. The pit at the yard remains open until dawn.'" Merryweather uttered a low cry. "Then the burial we found was not yet completed," Holmes said. Our intruder interrupted it. "The craftsman of that grave expected payment for a service own of concealment, lime, secrecy, and haste. A labourer, but not an ordinary one." He turned toward me. "Watson, recall the lime residue upon the curb. There is a mason's yard adjoining the new sewer works off Vauxhall Bridge Road. The same dust, same coarse granulation. We are going there now." Merryweather's protest was feeble. "At this hour?" "At this hour," Holmes said, already reaching for his hat. "Truth keeps no clock." The streets lay silent, the fog lifting in thin veils that revealed the first dull hint of morning. The yard Holmes sought was marked by a single oil lamp burning above the gate. A sign read, "Turner Sons, Builders and Excavators." Within, piles of stone, barrels of lime and timber offcuts stood like silent witnesses. Holmes's lantern beams skimmed over the ground. Footprints, 2 sets, one heavy workman's boots, the other is narrow and recent. He crouched, touching the print. "Merryweather, your shoes, please." The man complied. Holmes compared the sole. "Yours indeed," and beside it another tread, identical to that near your lodging. "The same man who beckoned you tonight has walked here as well." A noise interrupted the faint, metallic scrape of a shovel. Holmes extinguished the light instantly. We waited. Again the sound, cautious, rhythmic. He moved like a shadow between the piles, I at his shoulder. In a small clearing behind a stack of planks, a man in a workman's coat was digging by the glow of a lantern stuck into the soil. Holmes's whisper brushed my ear. "Do not startle him. Let him speak first." The man straightened, sensing us, and his eyes widened in the half-light. "Who's there?" Holmes stepped forward. "A friend of the gentleman who employed you," he said easily. "You have been paid?" The man hesitated, the spade trembling. "Not yet. I was told to finish before dawn, said the cart would come for the body." Holmes's tone hardened. "What body?" "The one they brought earlier was the clerk, dead as stone. Told me to dig deep, pour lime and cover before light." "Who brought him?" The man scratched his neck, wary. "Didn't catch the names. One of them was a society gent-posh voice, the other quiet, foreign look about him. Paid in sovereigns. Said the dead fella's name was Carstairs." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Society again. Latham's reach extends into dirt itself. Watson, make note. Sir Latham, a foreign accomplice, a hired digger, and 2 brothers, one dead, one vanished." The workman looked alarmed. "I did no wrong, sir, just work." Holmes softened. "Indeed. And you shall not regret your cooperation. Leave now by the side gate. Say nothing of this until you are called upon." The man fled, his boots striking the stones in a hurried rhythm. Holmes bent over the open pit. "Watson, look closely. The soil beneath unsettled only once. But see here an edge of fabric protruding, finer than workman's cloth. We've interrupted the burial of a gentleman, not a labourer." He reached down and drew up the corner of a sleeve black serge with the faint glint of a gold cufflink shaped as a compass rose. Merryweather gasped. "That was Henry's. I gave him that link last Christmas." Holmes nodded grimly. "Then it was indeed your brother who died here?" The twin who met us by the river is either an impostor or a survivor who deceived himself. Whichever truth we face, Sir Latham stands behind it. A faint sound broke the stillness of the ring of a distant bell, steady, mournful, exact. Holmes looked up from the grave, eyes narrowing. "Listen, Watson. That is not the church clock it comes from across the river. A buoy or warning bell near the Society's dock." He straightened. "They are moving something by water before dawn, and the current carries more than tides tonight." The bell's chime lengthened, drawing us toward its echo, a promise and a warning in equal measure. We moved at once toward the river, guided by that spectral clang. It came not from any church, but from the direction of the Royal Geographical Society's dock, a low, deliberate toll repeating at intervals too precise to be chance. Holmes's eyes, bright with calculation, cut through the mist. "That bell, Watson, is no signal of tide or vessel. It marks time for those who have no clock." Merryweather followed close, his voice little more than a whisper. "You mean they are there, Sir Latham and his men?" Holmes did not answer. The nearer we came, the more the air thickened with a chemical taint. The sour sweetness of chloroform mingled with the sharper edge of lime. Beneath the bridge, dim lamps threw trembling arcs across the water. A small launch rocked gently at the mooring, its engine silent, its cabin door ajar. Holmes halted in the shadow of a hoist and motioned me nearer. "Observe," he murmured. "The barge we saw earlier lies now against the dock. That crate large enough for a man was not aboard before. And the bell?" He pointed upward to where a line of wire connected the hoist's pulley to a small brass gong affixed beside the warehouse door. "It rings each time the hoist lowers to water level. A perfect signal between accomplices, one below, one above." We waited as footsteps approached from within the warehouse. Two silhouettes appeared in the lamplight, one tall and erect, the other slighter, moving with that cautious grace I recognized instantly as foreign. The taller man's voice carried clearly. "Careful with it, Mikal. The rest of the papers are inside. Once the tide turns, we'll have it downriver by morning." Holmes's hand gripped my arm. "Sir Latham," he whispered, "and our silent foreigner. Mark how the crime refines itself under civilization's banner." The smaller man bent over the crate. "Too heavy, sir? You sure he's dead?" Latham cut in coldly. "I watched him suffocate. He won't trouble us again. Now lower it." The bell clanged once, metal against night air. Merryweather made a choked sound, but Holmes silenced him with a gesture. "Patience," he said softly. "We shall interrupt the sermon." At its amen, the hoist groaned as the crate descended toward the waiting launch. Holmes moved, noiseless as breath, to the lever that controlled the gear. In one swift motion he wrenched it back. The rope jerked. The crate halted midway, suspended above the water. Latham spun around, eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" Holmes stepped into the light. "A friend to the truth, Sir Latham, and to the man you tried to bury twice." For an instant, silence. Then the foreigner drew a revolver. The shot cracked like lightning across the river, echoed by the bell's wild shiver. I fired in response. My bullet struck the iron railing beside his hand, and he dropped the weapon with a cry. Holmes advanced calmly. "Enough melodrama," he said. "Watson, recover that pistol. Mr. Merryweather, you will kindly untie the crate." Latham's face had drained of all pretense. "You have no proof, Holmes, none that will hold." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "I have lime, handwriting, and your own tongue. You supplied funds to Carstairs, found him insolvent, and planned to make his death pay your debts. His twin's return threatened exposure, so you arranged a second burial one that required silence, not ceremony." Latham's composure cracked. "He cheated me, stole from me." "Perhaps," Holmes said coldly, "but you wrote the ledger in blood." He gestured toward the crate. Merryweather had loosened the latches, and as we raised the lid, the truth came to light. Henry Carstairs' twin, the living man we had met by the river, bound and unconscious within. His pulse fluttered faintly, but he lived. Holmes's voice softened. "The man you buried walked again, Sir Latham, but only because you mistook the living for the dead." Merryweather sank to his knees beside his brother. "Henry, dear heaven, what have they done?" "Chloroform," Holmes answered. "Applied to simulate death before the first burial, revived to draw you out, then silenced again for a final disposal. Our foreign accomplice here was both a digger and a deceiver." The man called Marple spat weakly. "Your English is too clean. A man does what he is paid for." Holmes regarded him with cool disdain. "Then tonight you have earned only the wages of conscience." Latham lunged suddenly toward the key, but Holmes's cane intercepted him with surgical precision. "No further theatrics," he said. "The Yard will provide you an audience soon enough." Within moments, the rattle of approaching oars signalled Assistant Lestrade, summoned earlier by Holmes's telegram, appeared through the fog with 2 constables. "You do pick your hours, Mr. Holmes," he grumbled, eyeing the scene. "What have we here?" "A burial reversed," Holmes said, "and a murderer who mistook reflection for resurrection." As Latham and his accomplice were taken, Holmes bent once more over the unconscious Carstairs. "He will live, Watson. The bell that tolled for him tonight will toll again, but in truth, not deceit." Lestrade gestured toward the river. "And the crate?" "Evidence," Holmes replied. "Let it ring one last time." He pulled the lever gently, lowering the empty box until it touched the water. The bell struck once more a single pure note, freed from its deception. The sound lingered long after the crate sank, echoing across the current like a soul finding its own voice again. The river swallowed the sound as gently as if it had been waiting for it. For a moment, none of us spoke. The constables secured Latham and his accomplice, while Holmes stood unmoving, his gaze fixed upon the faint ripples left by the sinking crate. "Strange," he said quietly, "how the simplest devices yield the darkest music. A bell, a rope, a crate, each part ordinary, yet together they toll for conscience itself." Merryweather rose shakily from where he knelt beside his brother. "Will he recover?" "You said he would live." "With time," Holmes replied. The chloroform was calculated, not careless. Latham wanted him to appear dead, not be so at least until the second burial. His plan required the illusion of resurrection to lure you and through you to us. The timing of his bell ensured the performance. Lestrade, lighting his pipe, grunted. A performance, eh? Well, it's over now. We'll see both gentlemen safely to the Yard." "Not yet," Holmes said. "Before you celebrate, recall that we have uncovered only one of the 2 Carstairs brothers. The corpse in the builder's pit remains unverified. Until the body is formally identified, our curtain cannot fall." Merryweather turned to him. "Then you think Henry may still..." Holmes interrupted with a raised hand. "I think nothing until I know. Watson, accompany the officers with the living twin. Have a surgeon confirm his condition. Lestrade, take Latham to Bow Street and keep him isolated. The foreigner too will speak when the fog of loyalty lifts. As for me, I shall pay a final visit to the society." "Tonight?" I asked. Holmes's eyes caught the lamplight like steel beneath water. "The tide is turning, and so must we. Someone within those walls authorized the death of a man they still call colleagues." I knew better than to argue. Within half an hour we had delivered our charges and were once again in the cab bound for Kensington. The rain had begun anew, a steady whispering accompaniment to the horses' hooves. Holmes sat forward, hands clasped, his profile carved in thought. "Watson," he said, "have you noted the frequency of the bell throughout this case?" "Everywhere we've turned. I answered. "At Merryweather's lodging, by the river, at the yard. Precisely. It is our motif and our clue. Bells mark change hours, arrivals, deaths. Yet here they have been made to measure deceit. I suspect the Society's own signal, bell, the one above their private archive, was used to summon Carstairs on the night he vanished." The thought stirred my memory. "You mean he was lured there by sound?" Holmes nodded, a call he would trust implicitly. Only an insider could ring it at that hour. Sir Latham's authority ensured no. Questions were asked, even as one man entered never to return. A convenient system, Watson, the bell that signifies duty, becomes the knell of death. When we reached the Society building, the great facade loomed silent, its doors closed. Holmes produced a keynote his own, but one he had lifted from Latham's pocket, and unlocked the side entrance. Inside, the corridors smelled faintly of dust and varnish. Our footsteps echoed with uncanny resonance. He led me through the main hall to the map room, where the pale outline of Africa stretched beneath the glass. "Here," he said, "is the theatre of our crime. Look closely." He bent to the table, indicating a small stain near the edge of the parchment. "Blood, diluted. See how the pigment of the Nile runs into it. This is where Carstairs struggled or was struck." I knelt beside him. "But there's no sign of forced entry." "None needed," Holmes murmured. "He was expected." The silence was broken by the faintest metallic sound, the tap of a bell far above, high in the rafters. We froze. It came again, one clear note, precise, deliberate. Holmes looked up. "The bell, Watson?" The same tone. "Someone else is here." A door creaked on the upper landing. The faint glow of a lantern moved along the gallery. Without a word, Holmes ascended the stairs, every step noiseless. I followed, heart hammering. The light had stopped beside the archive chamber, and within its narrow beam stood a familiar figure, Sir Latham's secretary, Mr. Gray, his hand poised on the bell rope. Holmes's voice came quietly from the shadows. "You ring with excellent punctuality, Mr. Gray. One might almost mistake you for the conductor of this little symphony." The man started violently, dropping the rope. "Mr. Holmes, I thought everyone was gone." "Not everyone," Holmes replied. "You were about to summon your master, I presume? Or to destroy what remains of his correspondence?" Gray's eyes flickered toward the desk. I was merely tidying. Holmes crossed the distance in 2 strides and swept aside a sheaf of papers. Beneath lay a ledger, marked Expedition Accounts, Sudan Project. Inside, the entries told a different story. Payments to Mikal, disbursements in gold, and most damning, the final notation, completion of burial. Silence assured. Gray sagged. "I only obeyed instructions," he whispered. "Sir Latham said it was for the honor of the Society." "Honor built on homicide is a fragile edifice," Holmes said. "You will come with us." Before the man could answer, a loud crack split the air, the bell's wire snapping above. The instrument fell from its bracket and struck the floor, ringing a single, final note that reverberated through the hall like the end of judgment itself. Holmes stooped, picked it up, and placed it gently upon the desk. "The echo of the dead," he murmured. "Their silence rings louder than the living ever planned." We left the secretary trembling beside his own confession, and as we stepped into the dawn's first pallor, the last vibration of the fallen bell still trembled in the air, guiding us toward the truth that awaited. The vibration faded slowly, leaving in its wake a silence that seemed almost expectant. Holmes lingered at the threshold, his gaze fixed on the ledger, his expression unreadable. "There is poetry in coincidence, Watson," he said at last, "but only the guilty compose in it. This bell was meant to erase the final trace of guilt. Instead, it announced it." Mr. Gray had sunk into the chair, his face pale under the gaslight. "You must understand, Mr. Holmes, I had no choice. Sir Latham controlled everything, the funds, the archives, even the men we hired. When Carstairs discovered the embezzlement, Latham swore he'd settle it quietly. I only obeyed. Holmes's tone was cool, almost gentle. And obedience is the refuge of every accomplice. Tell me precisely what you were ordered to do. Gray hesitated, rubbing his temples. Latham said Carstairs had threatened exposure letters to the press, evidence of forged expeditions. He sent me to fetch the man that evening under the pretense of an emergency meeting. I rang the society bell, as instructed. Carstairs came at once, trusting the signal, as he always had. They argued. Latham struck Hemonce with the brass model of the Nile Delta that stood on the map table. Efficient geography, Holmes murmured. And you stood by. I thought he was only stunned. Then Latham said, "We'll make his disappearance serve us." He wrote a telegram in Carstairs's name announcing sudden illness and arranged a sham funeral with that foreign fellow. I was told to ensure the burial registry appeared official. And when the brother appeared, Holmes prompted. Gray swallowed. Latham panicked. He feared exposure, for the twins' presence proved deception. He decided to use him to let the living man become the ghost of the dead, said the resemblance would confound everyone. I swear I begged him to stop, but Holmes raised a hand. Enough. Your cooperation tonight may mitigate your involvement, though conscience delayed is seldom acquittal. He turned to me, the faintest spark of animation in his eyes. Watson, note the final sum in this ledger, £3,000 to McAlphinal payment. The foreigner was not merely a digger, he was the broker of silence. And yet, the figure is incomplete, no destination marked. I bent closer. Then where did the rest go? Holmes tapped the margin thoughtfully. Observe the faint smudge beneath the final entry. The missing line was erased recently. Gray, whose hand wrote it? I don't recall. It might have been mine, or Latham's dictation. He said the funds were for passage abroad, but abroad? Holmes's eyes sharpened. Then the accomplice intended to flee. Mikhail would not risk England's gallows for less than certainty of escape, which means a vessel awaits him still. The bell we heard tonight may well have been the signal to that ship. Gray nodded weakly. There is a society vessel moored at Millbank, Pier the Perseverance. She was due to sail for Alexandria at dawn. Holmes straightened abruptly. Watson, fetch Lestrade. Tell him to detain that ship immediately. If Mikhail escapes, he carries more than guilt. He carries proof of the larger fraud. The expedition's false accounts will unravel half the society. I made for the door, but Holmes stopped me with a quiet word. Wait, listen. From the street beyond the hall came the faintest echo, the rhythmic beat of hooves, slow, deliberate, approaching the very steps of the society. A carriage halted. Then a single bell stroke sounded, not from above but from outside, close and cold. Holmes drew his revolver. Too late, Watson. The ship comes to collect its conscience. We moved to the window. Through the thin fog of dawn we saw a cab drawn by a black horse. Its driver remained motionless, but the passenger within stepped down. The man was small, cloaked, and unmistakable Mikhail, free of his bonds and very much alive. Gray gasped. He was taken by the police. How bribery or oversight? Holmes said grimly. He has come to retrieve something he left unfinished. The sound motif pulsed again, the faint tinkling of a bell, this time attached to the horse's harness. There, Watson, our music resumes. Holmes moved with feline precision toward the door. Stay behind me. If he enters, let him think he walks into silence. The latch turned and the door creaked open. Mikhail stepped inside, his eyes darting to the ledger on the desk. Where is Latham? He demanded. He was to deliver the gold. In a sense, Holmes replied, emerging from the shadow. He has delivered you instead. The man froze, one hand slipping toward his pocket. I saw the glint of steel. Holmes's voice cut like a blade. "Do not attempt it. My aim is surer than your courage." Michael's hand fell. "So English law wins again." "Not law," Holmes said. "Consequence." The man gave a crooked smile. "You will find the truth difficult to prove. The grave is deep, the witnesses are few." "Yet the bell tolls," Holmes said evenly, "and each toll leaves an echo. That echo, Mr. Michal, lies not in sound, but in handwriting and in ledgers. You have written your own confession in arithmetic." Michal's face paled. "What do you mean?" Holmes turned the book toward him. £3,000, recorded but unpaid. Latham was dead before he could meet you again. That missing gold will damn you, for it never left his possession. When they recover his accounts, they will find the deposit in your name, a name you forged to ensure his silence. I see it already as a clerk at the Colonial Bank, persuaded by a foreign smile, the final act of greed executed with exquisite stupidity. The man's shoulders sagged. "Then it's finished." "Quite," Holmes said. "But if you desire redemption, you may tell us where you hid the original expedition papers." Michal hesitated, then gestured toward the map table. "Under the Nile." Holmes smiled faintly. "Appropriate." He lifted the map frame, revealing a hidden compartment lined with parchment scrolls, letters, receipts, and a small sealed packet. Inside lay a folded scrap of paper, stained and brittle. Holmes read it in silence, then spoke softly. "It is Carstairs' hand, his last note. If I die, let the bell remember me." The room seemed to hold its breath as the street's bell struck once more outside low, resonant, final. Holmes replaced the note with care. "The bell remembers Watson," he said. "The question is, who else must?" Holmes held the faded note between his fingers, his expression distant, yet alive with some inward calculation. "The bell remembers Watson," he said again, more quietly now, as though speaking to the air rather than to me. "But memory, once awakened, seldom confines itself to sound." Michal's gaze flickered toward the door, measuring his chance. Holmes noticed it instantly. "Do not be foolish," he said sharply. "Lestrade's men stand below. You would find their company less forgiving than mine." The foreigner's defiance wavered. "If I talk, will they hang me?" "That depends upon how truthfully you speak," Holmes replied. "Begin with the night of the first burial." Michal's eyes narrowed. "Latham said the man was already dead. He told me I would be burying deceit, not flesh. I dug as ordered, but when I covered him I heard breath faint but there. Latham laughed, said it was an echo of the lungs. He gave me more lime and told me to finish. His voice broke into a hoarse whisper. I obeyed. The sound stopped soon after. Merryweather, who had been standing motionless by the wall, uttered a strangled cry. "You buried him alive!" Holmes turned, his face a mask of iron restraint, not intentionally perhaps. Yet here lies the ultimate truth of the matter. Carstairs was not murdered outright, he was silenced by error, and his death became the cornerstone of profit. I felt the blood chill in my veins. Then Henry Carstairs' twin never understood that his brother died not by violence but by negligence? Holmes nodded slowly. A distinction of motive, Watson, not of consequence. Still, it alters the moral arithmetic. Latham sought concealment, not cruelty. Michal sought payment, not pleasure. Yet both served death as their master. The silence deepened. Then Holmes spoke again, his voice steadier. There remains the question of the bell. It has haunted every scene of this crime. We have assumed it is a signal, a mechanical device, but I believe it was also, perhaps unconsciously, a confession. Latham kept it always near his operations at the pit, at the dock, within this society hall. It was the sound he associated with the privilege to summon and dismiss, and so it became the sound that condemned him. Mikhail's voice was low. "You read too much into sound, Mr. Holmes." Holmes smiled faintly. "And yet it led me to you. Each tone traced your path. The bell above the pit was struck at the very hour the burial began. The one by the dock announced the crate's descent, and tonight the fallen bell here concluded your scheme. 3 or 3 confessions." Mikhail shook his head. "You think in riddles." "Truth often begins as one," Holmes said, "but I assure you the solution will be heard, not read." He turned toward me. "Watson, summon Lestrade. Tell him the bell shall ring once more before the hour is done." Before I could move, a harsh laugh echoed from the doorway. "You needn't trouble the yard, Holmes. They're already here." It was Lestrade himself, accompanied by 2 constables, his lantern casting sharp shadows across the walls. "We found the ship just as you said," he continued. "Crew arrested, papers seized, but the captain's log mentions another passenger booked under the name Charles Merryweather." The man beside us stiffened. "That's impossible," he cried. "I've not," Holmes raised a hand. "Peace, Mr. Merryweather. This is exactly what I feared. The impostor's web extends beyond this room. Someone intended to leave England in your name, using the dead man's shadow once more." Lestrade frowned. "Then who?" Holmes's gaze drifted toward Gray, the trembling secretary. He had the access, the handwriting, and the motive to escape the scandal that now engulfs his institution. "Did you truly think your master would protect you from the gallows, Gray?" The man's lips moved soundlessly. Then he lunged for the door. The constables intercepted him. A brief scuffle, a crash, and the secretary was pinned to the floor, the bell from the desk rolling beside him. It struck the boards with a single, resonant clang. Holmes stopped and retrieved it. There it is again, the bell's impartial memory. It rings equally for the guilty and the saved. Gray's voice came muffled against the floorboards. "He made me do it. Latham forced my hand, indeed," Holmes said, "and you, in turn, tried to flee with his gold, yet conscience travels faster than ships." Lestrade gestured to his men. "Take him." When they had gone, only the 3 of us remained, Holmes, Merryweather, and myself, surrounded by the lingering echo of that final chime. The dawn light now reached through the tall windows, revealing dust motes suspended like pale ghosts in the air. Merryweather spoke faintly. "My brother's note said the bell would remember him." "I never understood." Holmes's expression softened. Perhaps he meant that even among men who live by deceit, one truth still sounds. The bell is not his memorial, Mr. Merryweather. It is his vindication. He set the bell upon the desk and stepped back. The light caught its brass curve, and for a moment it gleamed like a halo tarnished by smoke. "You may keep it," he said quietly. "Let it ring not for grief, but for warning." We turned to leave. Outside, the city stirred into motion, the rattle of carts, the cry of vendors, the heartbeat of London resuming its indifferent rhythm. Yet beneath it all, I fancied I could still hear a faint metallic tremor, distant but insistent, as though the very air carried an echo. Of the case we had just closed. Holmes must have heard it too, for he paused at the threshold. "Do you hear it, Watson?" "Yes," I said. "A bell." He smiled slightly. "Then our work is not yet entirely done. The city rings with 1,000 of them, each tolling for some unspoken crime." He stepped into the street, his silhouette cutting through the rising light. "Come, my dear fellow," he said, "let us answer the next one." The bell's tone followed us out, softer now, but unbroken a sound suspended between memory and fate. Holmes had scarcely spoken the words when the bell outside gave another faint, deliberate stroke, an echo stretched over the waking city, softer than before, yet sharp enough to still the morning air. He turned his head slightly, as if listening not merely to the sound, but to the thought it carried. "Do you note, Watson," he said, "that no human hand now moves that clapper? The wind has no such rhythm. It tolls for closure, not alarm." Mikal stirred uneasily under the constable's grip. "Then what does it mean?" "That someone else remains," Holmes replied, eyes narrowing. "A mind that began this music and refuses to let it end." Lestrade frowned. "We've got the whole lot, Latham, the digger, the clerk, and this one. Who's left?" Holmes moved toward the window, his silhouette framed by the paling light, the architect of the bell itself. He turned, and his gaze fell on Merryweather. The clerk recoiled, colour draining from his face. "What are you saying, Mr. Holmes?" "I." Holmes's tone remained calm. "You were the first to hear it, were you not? The bell that woke you from your lodgings?" "You described it as distant but clear." "Yet the fog that night was too dense for any bell across the river to carry so cleanly." "The sound came nearer from your own house." Merryweather shook his head. "That's absurd, is it?" Holmes stepped closer. "You sought me not for help, but for witness, a performance carefully staged to establish your innocence. The lime upon your boots, the knowledge of the grave's location, the letter addressed in a dead man's hand are all elements accessible only to one who had arranged them. And now the bell rings again, as if to remind you your story has reached its final note." The man's composure crumbled. "You cannot prove that." Holmes smiled faintly. "On the contrary." "I can." He turned to Lestrade. "Bring up the brother." Within moments 2 officers entered, bearing a stretcher. Upon it lay the surviving twin, weak but conscious, his eyes fluttering open as he was set down. Holmes leaned over him gently. "Mr. Carstairs, do you recognize this man?" The faintest nod. "My brother's clerk," he whispered. "He was there when Henry signed the letter." Merryweather's voice broke. "I only meant to frighten him. He was ruining us all." "The debts, the scandal, Latham, forced his hand, and Henry's weakness forced mine. The lime, the burial god helped me. I thought it was kind." Holmes's expression did not soften. "You sought to save yourself through illusion. You manufactured a ghost to keep others from looking too closely at the living. And when your own conscience stirred, you disguised it as fear, pretending to be haunted by the man you buried." Merryweather sank to his knees. "I heard the bell that night, and I thought it was him. I swear it." "It was," Holmes said quietly. "Not the man, but his memory. That is the sound which haunts every liar." Lestrade motioned to the constables. "Take him." As they led the broken man away, Holmes remained by the window, watching the growing light touch the wet cobblestones below. The faint hum of London life returned, hoofbeats, wheels, voices, but beneath it all the ghost of that metallic tone still lingered like a question left half answered. Watson, unable to remain silent, asked softly, "Do you believe he heard it truly, Holmes, or was it merely his guilt?" Holmes considered this for some time before replying, "The two are seldom different. Guilt is the loudest bell a man can ring within his own mind. It strikes without wind, without hand, and never ceases." He closed the ledger on the desk, its cover settling with a quiet finality. "This, I think, concludes the affair of the stranger seen twice. There was never a ghost, only repetition. One act of sin replayed until even its author mistook it for haunting. I looked down upon the inert brass bell resting in his palm. And what of it now? Holmes examined it thoughtfully. It shall remain here. Let the society decide whether it rings for discovery or disgrace. Either way, it will not ring again at my bidding. He set it upon the desk beside the recovered note. For a moment, the faint morning wind stirred through the open window, brushing across the metal. The clapper trembled once barely audible, a whisper of sound so small it might have been imagination. Holmes glanced toward me, one eyebrow raised. "Do you hear it, Watson?" "I do," I said quietly. "Then let us leave before it grows louder." We stepped out into the street, where the fog was lifting into colour, and the bells of the city began their morning chorus. Yet amid their clamour I could still distinguish one faint, solitary, measured and precise, the tone that had followed us from the beginning, tolling somewhere behind us in Baker Street's direction. Holmes paused, listening. "The bell remembers," he murmured, "but so it seems does London." He turned his collar up against the wind. "Come, my dear fellow. Breakfast first, then, perhaps?" Silence. But even as we walked away, the sound rose once more from behind is soft, distinct, and the final single bell stroke closing the case as if the city itself had spoken its last word. Holmes did not speak for several streets, his steps matching the slow rhythm of that receding bell. Only when we turned the corner toward Baker Street did he draw a long breath, the kind that signals the return from intellect to reflection. "Strange, Watson," he murmured, "how often the city answers us when we think we have done speaking." I matched his pace, sensing that his thoughts were still fixed upon the case. "You refer to the sound?" He nodded. "The bell has ceased to be evidence. It is now epilogue, London's own commentary upon deceit. I dare say it will echo in the mind long after the ear grows weary." We reached our familiar door, and Mrs. Hudson, pale from lack of sleep, met us with the morning post. "A message came not 10 minutes past," she said, "delivered by hand." Holmes took the envelope, broke the seal, and scanned the single line upon the card, "You stopped one bell but not the last." It bore no signature. I felt the chill of recognition. From whom? Holmes smiled faintly. From what remains of conscience, perhaps, or from a mind that wishes to remind us this tale is unfinished. Yet I have a notion as to the sender. He crossed to the window, studying the quiet street below. The fog had thinned into a silver film, and the bells of St. Marylebone chimed faintly beyond. "You recall, Watson, that the foreigner Marple spoke of hearing breath in the pit before the lime was poured?" "Yes, and that Merryweather confessed the act was intended only to frighten?" "Of course." Holmes turned, eyes glinting with that peculiar light of deductive certainty. "Then consider this: if Carstairs still breathed when the burial commenced, and Marple's conscience was troubled enough to pause, is it not possible that the man survived long enough to crawl free before suffocation claimed him?" I stared at him. "You cannot mean I can," he said. "The corpse we found was disfigured, lime-burnt, unrecognizable, save for its clothing and cufflink. Those, Watson, could have been replaced by any hand seeking confirmation of death. The living twin we rescued was indeed Henry Carstairs, but the body we buried was not. The idea struck me with force. Then who lies in the pit? Holmes spread the card on the mantel. The missing labourer, the one hired, paid, and later dismissed. Gray's ledger omitted his final wage. It was not an omission, but erasure. Latham could not risk another witness. Then Carstairs himself wrote this message? Holmes's tone softened. Who else could write off the last bell with such irony? He was buried to the sound of one, and now calls from the echo of another. Alive, perhaps, in exile, or watching from some safer distance. He took his seat and clasped his hands beneath his chin. It is not my place to pursue him further. The law will close its ledger, the society will reconstruct its honour, and London, that great recorder of unfinished stories, will file this one among its countless unresolved melodies. I could not restrain my curiosity. You would let him vanish, knowing he deceived us all? Holmes's expression was almost tender. He has served his sentence in silence, Watson. What gallows could speak more eloquently? Besides, the dead man's name now shields him from pursuit. Let the world believe in one resurrection, it has done no harm. He rose, poured coffee into 2 cups and handed one to me. To the living dead, he said, with a faint smile, may they rest among the unremembered. We sat in silence for a while, the ticking of the clock taking on the cadence of that absent bell. At length I said, "You never told me, Holmes. Why does sound so fascinate you in this case?" He regarded the steam rising from his cup. "Because, my dear Watson, truth rarely shouts. It rings faintly, persistently, through walls of deceit. One must learn to listen for its vibration. Every man carries a bell within him, some toll for vanity, others for mercy. In this affair it tolled for remorse." A knock interrupted us. Holmes glanced at the clock. 8:30. Lestrade keeps monkish hours. Indeed, the inspector entered, hat in hand, face drawn. "We've searched the yard, Mr. Holmes. The grave was empty." "Empty?" I repeated. "Clean to the clay," Lestrade said. "No body, no trace, just a footprint leading toward the river." Holmes inclined his head, unsurprised. Then the bell was not wrong to sound again. Lestrade frowned. "You mean he's alive?" "I mean," Holmes said, "that London has reclaimed one of its phantoms. The file may close, but the city's conscience does not." The inspector left, muttering about miracles and paperwork. Holmes turned back to the window, the faint light reflecting in his eyes. "It is curious," he said, "how justice and mercy walk side by side, yet seldom acknowledge one another." I joined him there, watching the pale morning. The bells began to sound once more, the steady sequence marking the half-hour. Holmes listened as if deciphering a code. Finally, he spoke, so softly that I barely caught the words. "Each note, Watson, is a heartbeat. Ours, theirs, the city's. When the last ceases, the case is truly done." The final chime rang out, clear and perfect, and faded into the hum of London's day. Holmes's gaze followed it until silence reclaimed the room. Then he turned away with that small, weary grace I had seen only after the hardest battles of mind and heart. "Write it as you will," he said quietly. "But let the bell be the last word." I nodded, pen already in hand, knowing that somewhere beyond the fog one more echo still lingered, fainter now, but immortal, as though the city itself refused to forget the stranger who had been seen twice in one night. I wrote through the morning, my pen chasing the echo Holmes had left in the air. Each word seemed to ring faintly, as though that infernal bell still pulsed somewhere within Baker Street's walls. When at last I laid the final sentence aside, Holmes was still by the window, unmoving, a wisp of pipe smoke curling about his head like spectral mist. "You mean to publish it?" he said without turning. "In time," I replied, "though not before certain wounds have healed." He gave a low sound, half amusement, half weariness. "Time, Watson, is the only editor whose revisions none may contest." He tapped the ash from his pipe, then added, "There remains, however, a single footnote. I wish the record to bear true." I looked up, which is, that the bell did not deceive us. He turned, the ghost of a smile in his eyes. "We mistook its purpose, not its honesty. It was never meant to summon the living. It called only those who had forgotten they still were." The remark hung between us. Then Mrs. Hudson entered with the morning tray, her usual cheer subdued. "You've another visitor, Mr. Holmes," she said. "A lady this time. Wouldn't give her name, but she carries a letter." Holmes straightened. "Show her in." The woman who stepped across the threshold wore widow's black, yet her composure belonged more to resolve than grief. She handed Holmes a sealed envelope. He asked, "That this be given to you if ever the bells ceased," she said quietly. Holmes broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet, the handwriting unmistakable, measured unmistakably, that of Henry Carstairs. He read aloud, "To the man who hears what others overlook, I live, though not as before. Let the bell toll no more. I am content that the world believes me gone, for only in silence may truth rest. The river carries the rest of me. Farewell." The woman's voice trembled slightly. "He was my brother," she said, "the twin you saved. He left England last week. I came only to thank you." Holmes inclined his head. "The gratitude is misplaced, madam. I merely unknotted the rope that others tied." She hesitated. "He said you would understand that he was not the victim you thought, but the architect of his own disappearance." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Indeed? Then the circle is complete." When she had gone, he remained silent for a long while. At last I said, "You suspected this?" He nodded. "From the moment the body proved untraceable, Carstairs orchestrated the illusion from the start. His twin was drawn into ruin by debt. Latham exploited it, but it was Henry who conceived the ruse of death. Latham merely executed it clumsily. When deceit met greed, the plan devoured them both." I stared at him. "Then all along," Holmes said, "we pursued the ghost of a man who never truly died, nor ever truly lived again. He exchanged existence for freedom and left the world to mourn a fiction. He crossed to the hearth, stirring the coals. It was elegant, if ruthless. The living brother vanished with the society's gold, leaving his imitators to bear the cost of the fraud. Latham's guilt, Merryweather's terror, Micaw's remorse were chords in his grand design. And yet he paused, frowning slightly. "The bell. That I cannot ascribe to calculation. You think it followed him?" "I think it followed all of us," he replied softly. "The sound that recurred whenever falsehood deepened, perhaps not the toll of fate, but of conscience itself. Even he could not silence it forever." Outside, as though on cue, a distant bell rang the hourly sonorous, the same tone that had haunted our nights. Holmes listened intently, then exhaled. "You hear it too, Watson?" "Yes," I said. "It's clearer than ever." He smiled faintly. "Because at last it rings not for guilt, but for completion." He drew a folded telegram from his pocket and handed it to me. It bore the Admiralty crest. "Preserve sighted near Lisbon-owned passenger disembarked, identity unconfirmed." I looked up in astonishment. Holmes shrugged. "Our resurrected friend sails under many names. Let him drift where the bell cannot find him. Some souls require exile more than absolution." I could not help but ask, "Would you have turned him in if you knew?" Holmes met my gaze. "I would have listened first. Justice and mercy, as I once told you, walk side by side. It is only pride that insists one must lead." He turned back to the window, his voice dropping to that rare tone of human weariness. "It is finished, Watson. The case, the echo, the masquerade. All that remains is the sound." And indeed, as if to punctuate his words, the wind carried one final peal from far across the city soft, fading but perfectly pure. It lingered in the air, then dissolved into silence. Holmes's hand rested on the sill. "Do you know why I prefer bells to clocks, my dear fellow?" he asked, without looking round. "Why?" "Because clocks end in certainty, but bells in wonder. One reminds us what time has taken the other, what remains to be felt." He smiled briefly, distantly, and turned away. The morning light fell across his face, pale and unwavering. "Write that down if you must," he said. "It will please the readers. But leave the ending open. Let them hear the echo for themselves." And as he spoke, the faintest resonance seemed to tremble through the floorboards once more, not loud enough to startle, but enough to remind. It was impossible to tell whether it came from outside or within the walls of Baker Street itself. Holmes looked up, his expression unreadable. "Ah," he murmured, "there it is again." The sound swelled for a heartbeat and was gone. He smiled. "So it seems the city still remembers,"